Can go ahead and just get started with a quick introduction. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a landscape education webinar, which is co-sponsored by Bosca. And tonight's topic is going to be gardening for pollinators with our instructor, Juanita Salisbury. I also forgot to introduce myself. I'm Samantha Vergara with the City of Milpitas. I handle water conservation programs and projects there. Okay. And then just to go over a little guidelines for tonight's webinar. First, everyone that attends is going to be muted by default to reduce the amount of background noise during the presentation. And during tonight's presentation, we will be taking questions, but we will actually be addressing them at the end of the presentation. But if you have any questions that come up, you can definitely feel free to type them into the Q&A, and then we will address them at the end. You can also raise your hand during the Q&A session, and we'll allow you to unmute yourself if you prefer to ask your question verbally. And if you end up missing any portion of tonight's webinar, or if you'd like to go back to review any of the information that we go over, the webinar is being recorded, and a recording link will be made available to you at a later time, along with a follow-up email going over some of the resources that are discussed tonight. And then you can find the raise hand and Q&A buttons at the bottom of your screen. And then just to kick us off, I'll give a little bit of an intro about Bosca, our sponsoring agency tonight. Bosca stands for the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, and they are a special agency that represents 26 different groups, which includes cities, water districts, a water company, and a university, all of whom purchase water from the San Francisco Regional Water System. And the member agencies that Bosca represent provide water to about 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses and community organizations across Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. And overall, Bosca's main goal is to provide a high-quality supply of water at a fair price to Bosca's member agencies and the people that they serve. In addition to that goal, Bosca also focuses a lot on water conservation, and they offer a variety of different water conservation programs, one of which is the landscape education program, which is how we have this webinar here today. And some of the objectives of their landscape education program is to address water savings in the outdoor sector, as outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for conservation within the Bosca service area. And they aim to promote outdoor water conservation through the use of water efficient plants, high efficiency irrigation equipment, and smart watering practices. And if you live within the Bosca service area, there are lots of different programs and incentives that are available to you to help you conserve water outdoors. For example, they have the Lawn Be Gone rebate program, which would allow you to get up to $4 per square foot of traditional turf that's converted over to drought-tolerant plants and landscape materials. They also have rebates for up to $200 for installing a rain barrel to capture rain as it falls, which can then be used to hand water your plants and etc. There's also rebates available for smart irrigation controllers, so you can kind of remotely monitor your irrigation and control them that way. And then they also do have rebates as well for installing rain gardens in your home, and you can get up to $300 back for that. Take a quick sip of water. And the slide is just some more information for some Milpitas specific rebates. We have very similar rebates that are that are comparable to the Bosca rebates. We just administer them through Valley Water. Similar to Bosca, we have rebates for installing rain barrels as well as rain gardens. And then we also do have a cost share for $4 to replace turf with drought tolerant plants and landscape materials. In addition, we also offer up to $400 back for Milpitas residents that want to install a laundry to landscape gray water system. And then there are also some free programs as well, such as the WaterWise Outdoor Survey, which you can sign up to have an irrigation professional come out to your property to check out your irrigation system and provide you with any recommendations or tips to help you save water. And if you're interested in any of these rebates, you can find them at savewatermilpitas.org. And then here are two additional ways that you can save water in Milpitas. We have smart water meters, which connect to our Water Smart customer portal to provide you with near real-time water use information. It's a really great platform for monitoring your water use, checking to see if anything seems unusual. It's also a great place to start when you think you may have a leak or if you've received a high water bill. You can check out that information on there. And then another great way to help us save water is by reporting any water waste as you see it happening in the city. Some examples of water waste would include using broken sprinklers, using your sprinklers in the middle of the day when there's more evaporation occurring, or even using your sprinklers during or right after rainfall. And you can report water waste to us using either the My Milpitas app, My Milpitas through our city website, or you can call the water conservation hotline directly. And then very similarly, if you live in Santa Clara County, there are rebates available to you through Valley Water. Um, Most of the program offerings are very similar to what's offered in Milpitas as well as in the greater Bosca region. And you can find some more information about the specifics at watersavings.org. And then here are a couple of other resources that are available through Valley Water. They have some great informational videos, as well as resources at southbaygreengardens.org, and then a full list of rebates and free programs at watersavings.org. And the contact information for Valley Water is shown here. And if you like tonight's program, we do have a couple more webinars happening through the months of June all the way until August. And then we'll start again in the fall for our fall webinar series. And finally, here's another great resource from Bosca, bayareagardening.org. You can find a lot of great plant lists, information about specific plants, and watering information on there as well. And with that, I will pass off to Juanita to start her presentation.
Thank you, Samantha.
Mhm.
Let me share my screen here. All right. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to be talking about gardening for pollinators. I am a licensed California landscape architect and scientist, and I've been uh, doing pollinator gardens for a number of years now. And so I'm going to give you all of my cutting edge, state-of-the-art tips and tricks for getting resources for pollinators. You can follow me on Facebook or Instagram at the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. I also have a YouTube channel, Primrose Way. And if you're not liking the social media, then you can check out my website, which is primrosewaypollinatorgarden.com. Here in Palo Alto, I designed and installed a number of different native plant pollinator gardens. And these are great resources here in Palo Alto. So if you want to see what these plants look like, and how big they get, how they look during the summer versus the spring, during the winter. You can make a little a tour of these. Here's Embarcadero Road as you come into Palo Alto. The first garden is the Primrose Way Garden. And then we have our corridor project linking up the Gwynda Street Garden. And then there are other gardens, the Hopkins Avenue Garden, Arcadia Place, Island Drive, Churchill, and West Greenwich. These are open all the time. They're a community resource. Um, Check them out. And um, on my website, if you have any questions, there is a contact form so you can follow up with me. So here's just a quick little case study here. The Gwynda Street Garden before, and this had ivy on it for decades. The guy who lived in this house since he was a child said, it was ivy 60 years ago. So we changed it out in less than a month. And now it looks much better, I think. And it provides all kinds of resources and habitat for pollinators. But, getting from this to this is a step-by-step process. And if you focus on one thing at a time and don't try to do it all at once, um, that will lead you to a resilient garden that the pollinators will love. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk about keystone species, and I'm going to talk about pollinators. We're going to talk about plants. We're going to talk about habitat, and then the best practices to really optimize all your efforts. And my slides are peppered with photos that I've taken myself in various gardens to document the species that I see. And I've been documenting them for the last 10 years or so, almost on a weekly basis. So bees are a keystone species. But what is a keystone species? It's one that plays a pivotal role in an ecosystem. Without that species, an entire ecosystem would be dramatically different or might even cease to exist. These species, those keystone species, have what's called a low functional redundancy, meaning that no other species can fully replace their ecological niche. And so when you support multiple keystone species, you provide high functional redundancy to provide ecosystem stability. Basically, that strategy of having lots of keystone species provides backups. If one thing fails, then something else can take over. And we have about 1,400 species of native bees in California, more than any other state in the United States. Across the United States, there's about 4,000 species of native bees. Honeybees are not native. We're not going to talk about them. But instead, we're going to focus on the native pollinators, the native bees of California, and then the butterfly and moth species. So what are some of the benefits of supporting keystone species? One of the things is you get an amplified impact. They have a disproportionate impact on the overall health and diversity of an ecosystem compared to their abundance. So one species can affect a lot of other things. And so one thing, the effects are amplified throughout. And the keystone species are connectors in the environment. They create a ripple effect of connections throughout the environment. Basically, their behaviors affect a lot of other things, a lot of other living organisms. And that behavior then benefits a variety of both plant and animal species. So by really supporting those pollinators, you're supporting everything else in the environment. And so we really want to protect those keystone pollinators. But what are pollinators? And here I have a great close-up shot, a macro photograph of a bee collecting pollen off of Calochortus luteus. But a pollinator is an organism that moves the pollen from the male part of the flower to the female part of the flower, and that causes the fertilization of the flower to produce seeds. And the majority of pollinators are insects. And bees, the 1,600 species in California, bees do most of the work. other insects like butterflies, moths, beetles, flies, wasps, and ants pollinate incidentally. What makes bees the majority workers here is that they use the pollen to feed their offspring. They are vegetarians. Most of these other insects don't use the pollen in the same way as feeding their offspring. You have a few animals such as hummingbirds and bats that incidentally pollinate, but they're not actively moving pollen around. They're going after nectar. And pollinators are important because of plants. 87% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants require pollinators to set the seed. So plants in the environment reflect the pollinators that are present. You can't have one without the other. Whereas butterflies and moths, that their larvae eat those plants, reflect the plants that are present. And so without pollinators, about 90% of the plants on the earth would disappear. So we absolutely have to protect bees. There's just no life without it. And what we also know about pollinators is that speciation of plants, where plants take on through the genes moving around, they become bigger or have a different color bloom or a slightly larger flower. That happens more rapidly when you have pollinators actively moving the pollen so that seeds can be made. And you don't get that speciation in wind pollinated plants as quickly. So having that pollen getting moved around by a pollinator just speeds up that process. So let's talk about the function of pollinators. I'm all about function as a landscape architect, and here on the right-hand side, we have a carpenter bee, the biggest bee in North America. Um, she's nectaring on this Clarkia invicillata, the elegant Clarkia. Um, but the function of bees is to spread that genetic diversity of plants in the environment, pollination. And so think of bees as farmers whose function in the environment is to spread genetic diversity of the plants for other insects to eat. And this function then supports the diversity of floral and vegetative resources upon which other insects and animals depend. And this is one of the functions that make bees a keystone species. And how good they are at pollinating depends on a number of different things. How effective they are depends on their ability to carry pollen, their grooming habits, their foraging behavior, their body size and shape, their tongue length, long versus short, whether they are generalist, so whether they visit a variety of flowers, that's a generalist, although bees do tend to visit one species at a time, or specialist bees. They only visit one species of flower because they require that one particular type of pollen to feed their offspring. They cannot raise their offspring on any other types of pollen. So with 1,600 different species of bees here in California, we have variations on all of these different attributes. So a little animation there. So pollen contains the male genes of the plants for fertilization and seed formation. Here we have a beautiful bumblebee, Bombus vosnesenskii, the yellow-faced bumblebee, on one of our native plants, Monardella villosa. And you can see she's really packed in the pollen with a little bit of nectar to stick it together on her leg to take back to the nest. And so all those genes get moved around by her behavior. And the ability to carry pollen, so they have to move it around back to their nest. And so a lot of their ability to carry pollen depends on their grooming skills. And I include this slide because it's super impressive. With her 6 legs, this bumblebee is simultaneously hanging on. There's one leg. She's cleaning her antennae with another, and uses her 2 middle legs to clean the pollen off of her abdomen and then put it into the pollen baskets on her hind legs. And she's covered in pollen that she released with what's called buzz pollination. She vibrated the flower to shake out the pollen. And so it landed on her fur, her fuzziness, and then she has to groom it into her pollen baskets to take back to the nest. But I mean, this is pretty impressive to hang on by one leg and then have your other five legs uh, to collect it and put it into storage for the trip back home. Is it's an engineering marvel of behavior. And what we know about native plants is that gardens with those native plants seem to encourage other native plants to move in and colonize. And so remember what I said about plants in the landscape are the function of the pollinators there. So here at the Primrose Way Garden, I noticed this was coming up. This is a native Epilobium ciliatum, the willow herb, and it just came up by itself. Um, but then the culprit who's helping spread this plant, this is an Anthrophorbe with her mouth parts extended. She is undoubtedly helping to spread this plant. Look at the shape of the flower. It almost exactly matches the shape of her mouth. This was a really amazing shot to get because it just drives home the point of how these keystone species really can spread around genetic diversity and how coupled their own shapes and morphologies are with these plants. They're co-evolved together. So you want plants that are evolved to fit the bee species. And so you can uh, see that genetic diversity getting moved around and other plants colonizing because of their behavior. And here in California, we have many different kinds of plant communities. We have coastal scrub, oak chaparral, deserts, redwood forest, and so on and so forth. And as I said before, the plant communities are a function of the pollinators that live in them. And so you want to aim for the majority, and I'm going to talk specifically about native plants, in your garden to be local species appropriate for your plant community. And here, this is a picture of the very northern tip of the Point Reyes seashore where you have the the coastal lupin growing in there. It's a big bee favorite. The coastal poppy, which is the yellow with the orange star in the middle. You've got coyote brush in here. And ooh, our native thistle. This is the cobweb thistle. Just a beautiful plant. It's also the larval food source for the painted lady butterfly. So, and these plants wouldn't be here if it weren't for the bees because they are setting the seed for those plants. And so they reflect um, the fact that there are bees in the environment. And so when you're designing your garden, I'm just going to go over just this little mechanical thing about how you get the spacing correct. Um, Basically, you want to start it, you want to measure your space, especially important if you're getting those square footage rebates. And that's not a small thing because when you can get a rebate, that's good because who doesn't like to save money? Um, and then consider the goals for your garden transformation. And this is personal to each person. Do you want an oasis? Do you want a feral garden? Do you want something that's an English cottage garden? All of these different kinds of aesthetic things can be achieved. It just depends on what you want. But basically, what you want to start out with is kind of figure out your structure first, your pathways, your patios, so you can access places and hang out and be able to get in and maintain and enjoy your garden. The sequence of planting, start with trees first, then your shrubs, and then your perennials. Just easier that way. And when you're drawing your plan, you can use graph paper with one square equaling 1 foot. Makes it super easy to get your square footage. Um, you want to show your plants as circles at their mature diameter for your initial spacing. So to begin with, because as we'll see, it's not a one and done sometimes with gardens. You want to add more over time um, to enhance that resiliency and biodiversity. And so for spacing purposes, um, showing the plants at mature diameter, you can just have them barely just touch or overlap a little bit. Um, and then you can remember that there's sometimes with a plant that grows upright, you have space underneath for other things. So just something mechanical in terms of getting an easy design on paper. So my approach, and this is my strategy, and it's my state of the art strategy for making these gardens work as advertised. And it helps also to narrow down your plant choices. And because every garden is different, it's better to have a strategy rather than telling you exactly what to plant. Although I will tell you some of my plants that are my favorites that I like to use, they may not work in your situation, but the way to make decisions works for every garden of every size. And that strategy is to use the Keystone and Pioneer partnership. So again, keystone species just don't apply to bees. They apply to plants as well. And so a keystone plant, again, is the backbone of a mature ecosystem, providing essential resources, supporting a wide range of wildlife. Same kind of function as bees, supporting other things, making the other things have have what they need in the environment. The other type of species I like to use are the pioneer species. And these are the trailblazers. They rapidly colonize disturbed areas and they create conditions for other plants to thrive. And when you put these two plants in the same space, they work together the pioneers will prepare the stage while the keystone species ensure that long-term stability and biodiversity. And it provides a balance and leads to a more resilient ecosystem that is more sustainable. It's kind of like they they kind of mesh together and makes it harder for your garden not to survive. And it's a wonderful strategy, and I I have proof that it works. Um, so what are some of these keystone plants that we can find? And here is a screenshot done by the National Wildlife Federation. And this is their Garden for Wildlife. And this is a great resource. If you go to their webpage, they show the Mediterranean California Ecoregion 11, in which they show the different types of plants that are keystone plant species for California. And they break it down for you in terms of trees, shrubs, and herbaceous perennials and so forth. And then over here, they show you plants specifically for pollinators. So the top 30 native plant hosts for pollen specialist bees. Remember I said some bees require specific pollen to feed their babies. Plant those first. You want those pollen specialist plants to go in. The generals don't care. The specialists do. So plant for your specialist bees, and the generalists will be just as happy with those. And then the top um, plant genera for butterfly and moth caterpillars, um, they have these listed here. So you have a lot to choose from, certainly, for those. So once we get past keystones, let's talk about the pioneer plant species, those nature's trailblazers. And here is a picture of the Primrose Way garden and the hill strip between the sidewalk and the street. We don't irrigate this at all. These plants just come up like this every year with our poppies. And this blue plant is Gilia capitata. This purple one here is Phacelia tenacetifolia. And these are all annuals. So they die down. We cut them down when they're dead, and they reseed every year. So we don't have to do anything. It's like super easy. But the key function here is they provide soil stabilization and erosion control, nutrient enrichment, so nitrogen fixation by legumes like lupins. They basically pull nitrogen out of the air and make it available for the plants to use so that they can carry out photosynthesis. These plants attract pollinators and beneficial insects. They provide that early stage food and habitat for wildlife, and they create favorable microclimates, the shade and wind protection for other plants. So they actually provide some physical benefits for other plants to help keep the soil cool. And the benefits of planting some of these pioneer species is that you can jumpstart your garden. You can improve your soil health and fertility, reduce weed pressure, attract wildlife and increase biodiversity, and help establish those keystone species. Big example of those keystone species, poppies. So these are pioneer species, which are the first to colonize disturbed or barren areas. California's state flower, They're super hardy and can thrive in harsh conditions such as poor soil and limited water. And California poppies have all these characteristics. They're drought tolerant, they're adapted to our dry climate. They establish themselves quickly in open areas, very prolific in seed production. Their seeds can remain dormant for years and germinate when the conditions are favorable. And so by colonizing disturbed areas, they help stabilize the soil, prevent erosion, create conditions that are more suitable for other plants to grow. And they play an important role in the process of ecological succession, which is the gradual change in species composition over time. So the plants that you have one year may not be the same plants that you have the next year if those are annual species. So it's a little bit like a Christmas present in the springtime to see what is actually going to come up the next year. Some examples of those pioneer plant species, lupins. Um, they are wonderful plants with their tall spikes and colorful blooms. Um, these are great nitrogen fixers. They pull nitrogen out of the air again and fix it into the ground for other plants to use. Coyote brush comes in different forms. This is actually on our corridor project. These are super, super tough plants. They have a little tiny white blossom on it. Um, it's an evergreen shrub that we often see in coastal and chaparral communities. Super easy. Um, and this particular form, it's a variety called Twin Peaks. It's very flat, so if you need sort of a ground cover, this one's your thing. They come a little taller. There's another variety called Pigeon Point, which is more mounding. And then there's also upright forms that are more large upright shrub forms. And then the buckwheats, the Eriogonum genus. And there are lots of different types of Eriogonums. You just pick the one that grows locally to your area and or several of them. And um, they're super easy, super drought tolerant. One of my favorite ones that I like to use is the coastal buckwheat, Eriogonum latifolium. And they start off with a white pom-pom of a flower, and then as they get pollinated, the flowers turn pink. And then when they get to the seedy stage, then they turn this beautiful chocolate brown color. And when they turn the chocolate brown color, if you harvest the seeds and just throw the seeds where you want more, you'll have buckwheats for days. So super easy. And you can get thousands of free plants from just a few seed heads. And so another place that I like to go for finding the plants to use is Cowscape. And this is another screenshot here of the Cowscape webpage. This is done by the California Native Plant Society. And basically they have all the California native plant species, of which there are about 8,000 to choose from. Um, all through California. So you can find plants here. Really helpful design and inspiration if you don't know where to start. You can find nurseries where these plants are carried. Click on links, look to see if they have them in stock. How to care for your garden. Landscape professionals, if you don't want to design it yourself, there are people who do this for a living and can make it super easy. So you can just say, this is what I want, show me a design, and you're good to go. And you can search for plants by location, which is a good place to start. So for Santa Clara County, there's 840 different to start with. And they break these down by, um, sun, shade, water types, special uses, and so forth. So a great website to use for helping make some decisions. So getting back to the keystones, so what is an easy way to know if a plant is a keystone species? So let's go back to function. Let's consider the function of plants. Plants are the primary producers of food and the basis of food webs. So you have energy from the sun, and there it comes, going into plants. The plants are eaten by insects, and then the insects are eaten by baby birds. Baby bird food is caterpillars is baby bird food. That's the preferred thing that parent birds like to feed their babies. And if you consider that 37% of animal species on the planet are plant-eating insects, and as a rule, that native insects only eat the native plants they evolved with. This is key. So if you want to be able to feed birds, plant the plants that the native insects will eat, the ones that they evolved with. So getting back to the question, what is an easy way to know if a plant is a keystone species? A plant that feeds multiple species is more likely to be a keystone species because a lot of organisms depend on that plant. So if you have a choice between something that feeds 50 species versus 250, go with something that feeds more. So in terms of feeding, when you're planting these plants, you're basically choosing the organisms that eat them. And so um, gardening for pollinators means selecting those pollinators that you want to see in your garden. So when you plant milkweed, you're going to see monarchs. When you plant that coastal buckwheat, you're going to see the Icaricia acmen, the acmen blue. The California sister loves oaks, so it'll eat oaks, and so on and so forth. The pipevine swallowtail um, really will only eat the pipevine vine, um, and so on and so forth. The buckeye butterfly here um, really likes figwort. So and I have all of these plants in our gardens. I took all of these photographs myself, so I documented that, yes, the organisms that eat the plants are actually there doing their thing, laying eggs and having a good time having a meal of their preferred food. So by choosing the plants that are food for caterpillars, you're choosing those butterfly and moth species that eat those plants. So one of my absolute favorite plants, the thistle species, the native thistles, not the terrible bull thistle that's not native, but we have some beautiful native thistles. The one that I showed you up at the tip of Point Reyes, this is that plant. It is a larval food source for the painted lady butterfly. This is at our Island Drive garden. And thistles are a great place to hide out as you're turning from an egg into a caterpillar if you don't want to get eaten by predatory insects, because the thorns will protect you. And then the ants were doing some interesting behavior with them. So all kinds of interesting things happen. Um, so you can choose which insects that you want in your garden, those pollinators, by going back to Calscape. You can actually search for um, these particular organisms. So for Santa Clara County, we have over 1,000 species of moths and butterflies that you can support here just by choosing the plants that they eat. And if you plant it, they will come. Might take a little while, but they will find it because it's food. And food is the great common denominator of living organisms. So in your garden, plants and habitat, food, plants, water and moisture, shelter, and then nesting sites. So how do we optimize all these components in a pollinator garden to make it as productive as possible? So when you go outside, you can see things flying around and birds and everything chasing everything and wings coming out of everywhere. Um, you can look at all these different ways to make sure that these organisms have what they need. So food, pollinator planting basics. So in terms of what's helpful is to consider the foraging patterns over time. So you want to have things available over the course of the entire year. And so for early, mid, and late seasons, you want for each time period at least 3 species of blooming plants. So minimum 9 different species. So 3 things blooming early, 3 in the mid, and 3 for the late. And because pollinators emerge at different times of the year, and so provide those overlapping bloom times, keep them foraging in the garden, and then consider over the course of the day. Plants bloom early in the morning as well as night, and then moth species are our nighttime pollinators. So you want things that bloom at night. for those insects. Um, this is one of my other favorite buckwheats, the Eriogonum fasciculatum. Super hardy plant, super low water use. Um, and these are just a few of the insects that I have seen on this plant in my home garden. Skipper butterflies, the gray hair streak, different kinds of bees, little tiny ones, big fat bumblebees, predatory flies, all kinds of things will use this plant. And so you also, like I was saying before, you want to have a diversity of plant species. Um, when you have a lot of diversity of plants, think of it as a buffet. You have not just, or a salad bar. You don't just have iceberg lettuce and tomatoes. Let's add some sunflower seeds in there, maybe some celery, maybe some carrots, maybe four different kinds of dressing. So, you want an abundant variety of things to eat, so you can have a variety of things using the garden because everybody likes something different on their salad. So some research suggests that a garden with at least 20 different types of blooming plants is ideal for a diversity of pollinators. Some studies even suggest that maybe 40 to 60 different species is even better. The more the merrier. I find that the more plant species I add, the more alive the gardens become, the more things I see flying around. It's incredible the number of species that you see. And as you add more plants, they actually help each other and they form this really tight-knit community. Um, and that just builds a lot of resiliency and diversity. So you can start with a few backbone shrubs, the pioneers and the keystones, and then just keep adding plants over time. And you also want to you want to leave areas of bare dirt for the bees to nest underground. Remember that shelter is important. 70% of our native bees nest underground, which is super cool. And this is the Hopkins Avenue Garden looking glorious. Um, consider consider what bees see. So bees are attracted by color, not so much what the plants smell like, but by color. And blue flowers are preferred. Blue is a very interesting color to bees because it means reward, and blue means nectar. And so it's sugar, and sugar is a great reward. I love sugar. I like chocolate and sugary things. And so do bees. And so they really prefer those blue flowers and they see in the ultraviolet, so it's super easy for them. So you want to try to get some blue flowers in there. And here we have the mountain digger bee over at the Gwynda Street Garden. She is on Verbena lilacina, and this is a great nectar plant. She's just like got these interesting furry patterns. Beautiful creature. Um, and so pollen. So as I mentioned before, um, pollen is the bit of the plant that carries those male genes. And few other insects rely on pollen as a sole source of protein to feed their larvae. Early on, back in, evolutionary time, bees were actually wasps, and wasps eat other insects, and they provide insects for their offspring to eat. But bees figured out that it was better to be a vegetarian because then your prey didn't fight you. And so it made it easier for them to diverge into their own evolutionary path, and they could have pollen to feed their offspring. It's a great source of protein with fats and starches and vitamins. It's a super stable structure. The outer part is very tough and so can persist for thousands and thousands of years. Um, and as I mentioned before, all pollen is not created equally, and bee species vary in their abilities to digest different pollens. So specialist bees really focused on being able to digest that one type of pollen. And those bees that are raised on non-host pollen fail to survive. So it's super important to plant those plant species to feed specialist bees. And pollen comes in a lot of different colors, and the color is given to it by this coating, which is called the pollen kit, which is a very interesting word. And that's made out of fat, essentially, carotenoids, flavonoids, some proteins and carbohydrates. And that actually, it's a very interesting thing. It goes up into pollen goes up into the atmosphere. which may actually play a role in cloud formation. So pollen is a very interesting thing. And so here we have one of our generalist bees, the yellow-faced bumblebee, working on a lot of different kinds of flowers. We have globegilia here. We have the red eriogonum here on some phacelia, the buckwheats, the pollen. Um, this looks like deerweed, asters, scrophularia or the figwort, and then monardella. So they're generalists. They'll eat just about anything. Um, and then consider nectar. So this is where a lot of insects will also get moisture because nectar is a fluid. And it's also the source of sugar. So we're talking sucrose, glucose, fructose, maltose. So a lot of different kinds of sugar. And the mixture depends on the type of plant species. And it's also, it can be like really thick or it can be kind of watery. And so what kind of a tongue that you have, if you have a really long tongue, it's like a straw and it's really hard to suck up that's really thick nectar. So you like the more watery nectar. So providing a lot of different types of plants with perhaps a thicker nectar and thinner nectars is going to appeal to a lot different kinds of bees. And so here we have Monardella villosa, the coyote mint, has a nice minty smell, purple flowers, a lot of different species love the nectar for this. And nectar is what plants use to kind of draw in those pollinators. And then once they get pollinated, the nectar secretion declines and then the flower goes on to form seeds. So nectar is just a wonderful reward that fuels flight and other behaviors in the ecosystem. And then, um, so nectar is a source of water, but also when plants are eaten by insects, they actually ingest water and they store water, kind of like a tiny living rain barrel. And so they use those living tissues then to move it through the environment using various processes. So a caterpillar, a nice juicy caterpillar becomes kind of like a tube of protein goo for a baby bird and gives that baby bird some water. So water cycling through the plants doesn't stay just within the plant, but it also goes into animals as they eat those plants. But how much water do plants use? So um, many of our California native plants are super low water use, and you can find out just how much by going to a website which is the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. It's an online searchable database for plant factors of individual plant species, and it's published by the University of California Cooperative Extension and the California Department of Water Resources. And so what they do basically in this is they rank plants based on if 100% is a lawn, non-native lawn that's using up all the water in your water bill, they rank those. So a lawn is 100%, and then they go at like 70 to 100%, 40 to 60%, 20 to 30%, or 0 to 1% of what a lawn might use. So, and lots of our plants are very low water use. So you can definitely use this table to help cluster those plants that have similar water uses together so something doesn't get under or overwatered. So you want to cluster plants together based on what type of water they use, what type of like water use, if it's high or low. Now, some specific examples, and these may not work in everybody's gardens, but I like to include them because they work pretty well here in Santa Clara County. This is an Arctostaphylos, otherwise known as the manzanita. Manzanita means little apples because the seed pods are these little tiny red balls that look like little apples. So this is one I used quite a bit, Arctostaphylos densiflora, a variety called Howard McMinn. It's evergreen, so it looks good all year round. And it has a white bloom in January, so early blooming. And it's a keystone species supporting 78 caterpillar species and 13 pollen specialist bee species. They also provide berries, nectar, and shelter for a lot of other organisms. And you can see here's the yellow-faced bumblebee again, nectaring on this plant. And she's got a long tongue, and this is a tubular flower, which helps maintain uh, the kind of liquidity of the nectar for her. So the nectar doesn't evaporate, the water doesn't evaporate out and make it thick. So it's kind of like a little cup there for the nectar. Another one I like to use, the Ceanothus species. One that's been very successful and easy to use, I like, is Ceanothus maritima. Common name is blue blossom. Um, there are lots of other common names. I like to use the scientific name for specificity. This particular variety is Valley Violet. Um, Super easy to grow. It's evergreen, so it looks good all year round, and it has these beautiful blue blooms starting in January, and super low water use, larval host for dozens of butterfly and moth species. This is our black-tailed bumblebee. You can see she's got her tongue out because she's going after the nectar, because blue means nectar, and she's going for it. Just a beautiful little bee. Another one that I like to use, again, for nectar purposes, are our native gooseberries, the ribes genus. And this is Ribes malvaceum, Christie Ridge. And this is in December at the Hopkins Avenue Garden. It makes such a beautiful Christmas display to have these pink panicles of flowers hanging down. Hummingbirds go nuts for this, super low water use, and it blooms for probably about 6 weeks during the wintertime. So long bloom period, gets about 5 to 8 feet tall, 5 feet wide, and it's a host plant to 3 confirmed and 76 likely species of butterflies and moths. Just a beautiful, beautiful plant. And then if you want a powerhouse plant, um, this is Encelia californica. This is a powerhouse pollinator plant for pollen specialists, and it's a larval host for butterflies and moths. And this thing will bloom 10 months out of the year. And this is one that's in my backyard, and these are all species that I've seen on this plant. We've got a little syrphid fly here. We've got a skipper butterfly. We've got moth larvae that may or may not have been eaten by a baby bird. We've got, this may be a skipper larva. It's hard to tell. They all kind of look the same to me. Another type of native bee here. This, I think, is a honeybee. We've got a beautiful, I just love the metallic green bees that we have, the little green sweat bees. Got leaf cutter bees. We have, um, this looks like a longhorn bee, the Melissoides genus here. But, they're just, this is a great plant, so you can't go wrong with it. Um, Other plants that we have in our gardens that are pretty awesome, um, you know, lots of things. Let me go back to that just quickly here. Um, like I said, lots to choose from. This is a bumblebee on that figwort. That's a food for the buckeye butterfly. And this is they're just, the nectar, I guess, is just like super tasty on these. Also, your annuals, you know, if you don't have a lot of money to spend, seeds for annuals are super cheap and they tend to reseed. So you can start with one packet and you're basically set for life with poppies. This is Gilead capitata, and this is Phacelia tennessetifolia, I mentioned before. Um, Nectar is super high quality. These are all super easy to grow. So you want to, again, have lots of abundance. So for pollinators, you want to consider the quantity and placement of floral resources. So you want to mass your plants together of a single species because it just makes it easier for the pollinators that are foraging to not have to go great distance between blossoms. If they can buzz to one blossom to the next pretty efficiently, that's better because then they can spend more time gathering things up and then head back to the nest and just make more baby bees. So masses at least 3 feet in diameter to enhance that efficiency. because it takes a lot of pollen to make one baby bee. In one study, 85% of 41 bee species required all of the pollen from more than 30 flowers for just one larva. Other species required all of the pollen from over 1,000 flowers for one bee. So um, more is better. And this is at the Gwenda Street Garden. We have a massive Eriophyllum latifolium, otherwise known as the woolly sunflower. So a huge mass of that for the pollinators. As I said before, the ability to carry pollen. Remember, they're gathering the pollen up and taking it back to the nest. And so how they carry it, some have these specialized hairs on their legs, some have specialized hairs on their abdomens, some have a flattened area on the back leg where they pack it in, some actually ingest it and carry it inside of their bodies. Um, and bees tend to not want to go far between the nest and the flower. If there's an abundance of resources, the bees will essentially nest like right at the base of the flower. They don't like to go very far. The shorter the distance to the nest, the better. That means that you'll have nesting bees in your garden. So some best practices, we want to make sure that these organisms are able to complete their life cycles. And native gardens are just less maintenance than a non-native garden with lawn because you don't have to mow it. You don't have to dethatch it. You don't have to fertilize it. So you don't have to like have a service come out and do things to the lawn and like, make noise once a week. Um, you're basically what you're doing in a native garden is you're weeding, keeping those weeds at bay. You want to irrigate just basically to encourage those roots to search for the water just outside of the root ball. And when you plant up things, you want to basically try to plant during planting season, which here in California is the winter and spring. When it's nice and cool outside, it's the rainy season. It's just going to make things much easier to um, to establish. And if it's raining, you don't have to water as much. So water about once a week to get those plants established and for the first couple of years, and then after that you can have some lesser schedule of watering. Prune sparingly. um, don't have to fertilize. These plants don't like fertile soil. Mulch initially to control weeds and to help establish plants, and then mulch with leaves. If you don't like the way that leaves look in the garden, you can just put a little thin strip of wood chips on the top, wood bark to hold those in place and give a uniform look. Leave those areas of bare dirt for nests, and you don't need to use leaf blowers in planted areas. Just leave the leaves. Like I said, it's less work. You know, some people say, well, the leaves are smothering my plants. The plants will grow up through the leaves will break down, and they'll drop down and become one with the soil eventually. I mean, I sometimes brush leaves off of plants, but with 7+ native gardens, I don't have time for diva plants. So if they don't want to grow up through the leaves, that's on them. It's not on me. Like I said, there are just less maintenance. Basically, you sit back, relax, and let the plants show you how nature works. And don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. Nesting and shelter. We always see the butterflies, we see the moth species, we see the bees, but a lot of insects spend more time as an egg or a larva, and they overwinter inside stems or leaf litter. So that's why you want to keep those things there. It's like you want those then to emerge in the springtime to become those butterflies and moth species. And the adult lifespan can be really short, like a couple of weeks, if that, some are even shorter. And so complexity in the environment. This is a leaf cutter bee coming out of a bamboo stake in my backyard. She really surprised me when she came out. I wasn't expecting it, but these bees will nest just about anywhere. And so we've piled up some wood logs here for just adding a little bit more interesting little niches, some kind of random chaos, because nature loves chaos. Nature loves these kind of unexpected niches, and life will find those niches and use them. So, you know, it can be messy because messy is appealing to many wild creatures. Pruning, like I said, um, we prune very sparingly. A lot of male bees like to take a little break from their courtship behavior and take naps, and some of them, to be able to sleep soundly, will put their mouth parts into a dry stem, and then they can catch a few minutes of sleep before they take up their courting activities again. Um, and so this is a male Anthrophora bee that we saw at the Island Drive Garden. And again, you know, a lot of insects will shelter inside of these hollow stem plants. So if you trim things down, leave about a foot of stem, because that's where the eggs will be stacked on top of each other. And also leave the leaves. Bumblebee queens overwinter in leaf piles, especially underneath oaks, the deciduous oaks that drop their leaves. This is huge. This is from the Xerces Society. Um, and then again, bare soil is important. This is a relatively small area over at the Island Drive Garden. And then just remember that your garden is dynamic. Your relationship between the plants themselves, the organisms that use the plants, their caretaker, the overall structure of the garden, this all changes over time. And here we have a big, beautiful swallowtail nectaring on some Monardella villosa. And then let those creatures um, be able to go through their life cycles. Here we have at the Hopkins Garden um, two Ackman blue butterflies doing their mating dance. And I just love it when I see this behavior of different butterflies. It's just magical. But we want them to be able to do their courtship undisturbed, let them lay their eggs, and then, I mean, literally, this is the plant. This is the Areogonum latifolium, the coastal buckwheat, where they will lay their eggs. So courtship behavior right next to the food source, kind of like uh, a little dinner date. So allow those processes to occur. And what happens is that as you continue to provide an abundance of resources for the pollinators, so does your ability to optimize the power of your garden, which leads to an abundance of life, as well as saving water and money and creating beauty. And here we have, again, the yellow-faced bumblebee on Gilia capitata with the blue pollen, and then a masked bee who takes pollen inside of her body to back to her babies, and she's on a different species there. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that people have.
Perfect. Yeah, we just got one. Actually, I took note of the slide that was being shown. If you could maybe go back, I think it's your best practices slide.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and
Best practices.
Michelle put her question in the chat. I also allowed you to mute yourself too if you'd like to ask verbally as well.
Let me find it. Best practices. There we go. Oh, come back. Best practices. Yes, here we are. Okay, best practices.
Cool. Um, yeah, Michelle had put in the chat, is that blue pollen on the bee's little legs? That's
Yes.
amazing. It is?
Blue pollen is amazing to see. It's just like, I whenever I get a new plant, I always like to try to find out as much as I can about it. So I'll like Google it and read as much about like what nutrients are in the pollen. So I'm like, oh, what kind of like carotenoids are in there? What is actually contributing to that blue color? It's likely some vitamin of some sort. Um, and but yeah, I mean, she says packed on the blue pollen there on the Gilead the Gilead tricolor. This is a beautiful annual that we have here in California. And I mean, look at this. You can see why she's attracted to it. I mean, it's just like when I said blue is a preferred color, um, this plant is like going all out. I've got blue pollen, I've got blue petals, I've got like a purple interior. How could you miss me? So, this is the conversation that plants have with insects. We are not privy to those conversations. We can only see them, vicariously, but this is what the plant is communicating uh, to this organism. But yeah, just an amazing picture. You get to see when you plant native, this is what you get to see. And um, you know, I was just out in my own home garden today and just amazed at just how many creatures are flying around. I mean, it was like zoom, 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 zoom. We had a couple of different kinds of birds nesting in our yard this year. So it was, functioning as intended. So I'm just really happy to see that, the more resilient gardens as you add things over time, just all the different life that you attract. It's unbelievable. Happy to take any other questions.
Yeah, and if there were any other questions, you can type them out in the chat, or you can use your raise hand feature if you prefer to ask verbally. Yeah, I actually have. Do you take this picture yourself? I know that you had mentioned that some of the pictures on the slides were taken
Yes.
by you. You took this one? Wow. Okay.
Yes, I have a macro lens for my camera. And, once I started taking care of the gardens and I wanted to really document the species that I saw there, a regular camera, I couldn't get close enough to get a clear picture because some of these insects are really small. And that for me opened a door into another world to be able to get up close and to really see the details that I would normally not have seen. And so that's just another benefit of planting for pollinators is that there's, there's just like so much in the environment and our world that we don't get to see. Um, and by bringing these things into your own home yard, you get a glimpse into this world that, it's there. And um, normally you just don't actually see it if you don't plant all these native plants. And so, yeah, if you want to see the gardens here in Palo Alto, you can see what I mean. They're just, I think the swallowtails are over at the Island Drive Garden right now because we have their larval plants over there that they like as well, which is Perideridia, otherwise known as Yampa, which the roots used to be eaten and are still eaten by humans. So those can be cooked and eaten as well. So, um, some of these plants not only are food for caterpillars, but they're food for humans as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And then Michelle had put in another comment in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and read it out. I really appreciate knowing the rule about 30 flowers. I had no idea. My neighbors planted a pollinator garden of only 3 species, but many flowers, and it was alive with hundreds of bees. I only planted a few of the same flowers and wondered why I didn't have any. Now I know why. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Oh,
No other pressing questions?
um, I don't see anything coming in.
I would
But
also, yeah, I could
sorry.
also, if something comes up, there is that contact form on my website. And,
Mhm.
feel free to shout out and say, what about X, Y, or Z? Be happy to take any other questions as they come up. Um, and also I'm always looking for volunteers too. So that's another great way to use that contact form if you're interested in becoming one of the volunteers. We do something nearly every single weekend because with 7 public gardens, we need to rotate through them to keep the weeds at bay.
Awesome, awesome. I'll definitely include that in my follow-up.
Very good. Thank you.
Like,
I would also, if you don't like social media, I mean, my Instagram is pretty entertaining. Um, and I document the work that we do in the gardens. So, um, it's a good way to know like what's blooming or, what events are coming up and things like that. So, um, that's another good way to follow along and kind of like see what's going on out in the environment.
oh, question in the chat from Michelle. What's your
My Instagram.
Instagram again?
Yes, so the Instagram is Primrose Way Pollinator Garden.
Um,
Yep. And it's also the Facebook. I cross post on those as
okay.
well. Yeah, and I also have a few videos on my Primrose Way YouTube channel that show some seed starting things that I do. How to get seeds out of a Clarkia seed pod, how I do. Sometimes I'll start seeds in the refrigerator. I'll do the cold moist stratification, which is basically taking seeds that need to be cold and wet for a while and put them in a coffee filter that's been wetted down, stuck into a plastic bag, and then put into the crisper drawer in the refrigerator until they sprout. Some seeds require that. Seeds are a really great way to be able to afford doing gardening because in a packet of seed you'll end up with like 500 seeds or something um, for some species. But you can get a lot of plants from seeds. So I keep a few mother plants that I have, and then I take those seeds and start them or toss them into places where I'd like to see more of them.
Great.
I'm not seeing any other questions.
Yeah, I don't see anything else coming in either. Um, but I'll definitely include the link to the contact form on your website in case anything else comes up. And then again, the link to this recording will be included in my follow-up email, along with some links to the resources that were talked about today. And I'll definitely have to go and check out the pollinator gardens. I'm in the area, so I definitely will try to stop by and see what's going on over there.
Excellent. Cool. Very good.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Juanita, for your presentation today. There's a lot of really great information and a lot of beautiful visuals. And thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right. Michelle has one more comment. Thank you so much for this presentation. I found the Instagram. I can't wait to keep scrolling. I'm also
Excellent.
going to check that out.
Okay, very good.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for attending. And again, thank you so much, Juanita, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
You're very welcome.
All right. Have a good one, guys. Let's see.